friends. Pastor Nicole here. Welcome to our Midweek Moment. So glad you're here. This week we continued on in our sermon series, Caved In, Finding Light When Life is Dark. And we talked about the cave of grief. And here's the thing about grief. I think our culture does a really poor job with grief. For whatever reason, we do not grieve well. We like to kind of push it under the rug. We don't want people to see that we are upset or hurting. We put on a brave face, we often say that. And I just think it does us such a disservice. Grief is a natural and needed human emotion. And so when we don't allow ourselves to grieve, or maybe don't allow ourselves to grieve publicly, we are really harming our own well-being. One of the things that I think is so important about grief is being able to rely on community when we grieve. I have seen this over and over. It is so important. We host Grief Share support groups here at Willow Hill, usually once a year, usually after Easter. We will host a grief share, and it's open for people in the community and for members of our church. Whoever wants to come can come, and we go through these 9, 10, 11 weeks together, and we spend time talking about our grief. We spend time crying with one another. We spend time being there for one another. It is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I have been so grateful that in those support groups that we have had, that people form friendships that continue to last well after the support group has ended. People continue to be there for one another in their grief, and to realize that, grief doesn't just go away after a year of somebody's passing. Grief doesn't go away after the funeral is over. Grief stays with us for the rest of our lives. And we learn how to manage it, but it's always there. It doesn't go away. One of the things that we talk about in Grief Share is that we don't move on after the loss of a loved one. We just learn how to move forward. We're not moving on. We're not going to suddenly forget our loved one. We're not going to suddenly just not be sad that they're not with us anymore. That's not how grief works. We're going to be sad. We are going to miss our loved one for the rest of our lives. We will. And that is completely natural. And it's important for us to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge that we see other people in their grief, and that we also aren't forgetting their loved one. I think one of the things about grief is, I'm not sure what it is about our American culture, that we just don't want people to see the vulnerable side of us, or we don't want people to see that we're struggling, or that we're having a hard time, or we're sad. It's just so silly. We would do so well to borrow from other cultures' practices of grieving and how they process that emotion and process being in that cave of grief. I think a lot of times we think, well, you can just grieve until the funeral's done, and then there's closure, and then you're done. No, that's not how it works. I really love the idea of, from the Jewish culture, the idea of sitting Shiva with people who are grieving, that after the funeral is over, the burial happens, you sit Shiva for a week, and it's during that week that you allow people to come and sit with you, that you open up and process your grief with them. You share how you're feeling, and you allow those people to comfort you. It's such a beautiful practice, and I feel like we really miss that opportunity in our culture. So many times after the funeral, everybody goes back to their normal life, and then the person or people who are grieving are just kind of like, guess I'm supposed to go back to my normal life now. I don't know what that looks like or feels like without this person in it. And then that could just kind of fall apart because you don't have the support of a community around you. I'm not saying that happens all the time, but I think it happens often. So as we think about grief and what happens when we are in the cave of grief, I really think we would do well to spend a little more time in that cave, not feel like we have to push ourselves out and, get on with life. But to return to that cave, kind of what I talked about in the sermon, to return to that cave when we need to, that when we need to find refuge from the world and a safe space to grieve and to be sad, it's okay to return to that cave kind of over and over as often as we need to. Grief is such a tricky business, and we don't do ourselves any favors when we just like push it down and pretend that it's not there. We put it aside or we move on. No, we're going to move forward because that's what we need to do, right, in life. But we're never going to move on from our loved one. We're never going to forget or not be sad about it. We're just going to have to learn how to grieve as we move forward. And we can do that so much better when we have a community with us, helping us grieve, acknowledging that it's okay to be sad, acknowledging that it is okay to be unsure of what life looks like without your loved one. So as we think a little bit more about the cave of grief, I invite you to think about the grief that you're holding in your life and to acknowledge it, to name it, maybe talk to a friend about it or a family member to say, hey, I am really missing so-and-so today. I'm having a really hard time because I just wish that they were here and they're not. That person isn't going to be able to bring that person back, right? They're not going to be able to erase your grief, but they can sympathize and empathize with you and say, yeah, I miss that person too. And you can share memories and you can share how they loved you well and how you loved them. And that is how we work through our grief. That's how we're able to come back out of the cave of grief. When somebody comes alongside us and helps us talk through it. Grief is a tricky, tricky topic. It is so hard. And it's something that I wish we could start modeling better, especially in the church. I had somebody on Sunday say, oh, I'm so glad I go to the church that is willing to talk about hard things. And I thought, what are we doing if we're not talking about things like grief? Like, what is the church doing if we're not addressing these kind of really hard topics that apply to everybody? Like, that's what the church should be. We should be there for one another, and we should walk with one another through hard times. So I hope you will just kind of process that, think through that, maybe allow yourself to verbally process with somebody else how you're feeling about somebody that you miss. Grief. It's a tricky one. Well, I hope you will join us this weekend as we address the cave of hopelessness. I know, sounds like a blast. But I do hope you'll come because we've got some really important things that we can learn about what happens when we find ourselves in the cave of hopelessness and what we can do to find the light in those dark situations. So join us in person or online, and we will see y'all next time. Have a great rest of your week.